What would you do if the only person who could save your life looked at you not with pity, but with a cold, hard warning? For a gravely wounded man of Comanche blood stranded in the blistering Arizona territory, a remote cabin was a miracle. But the woman inside, with eyes as stormy as a summer squall, offered him a chilling choice. She tended to his wounds, her touch sure and steady, yet her words were a blade. "You'll regret saving me," she warned, the promise of future sorrow hanging heavy in the air. He didn't listen. He couldn't. And in that moment, he sealed both their fates to a storm of bullets' betrayal and a past far more dangerous than any wound. This is the story of that choice and the bloody reckoning that followed. The world had shrunk to a searing haze of red dust and the coppery tang of his own blood. Caleb Blackwood knew he was dying. The gut shot a parting gift from a posse that saw his heritage before they saw the man was a hot, insistent coal in his belly. He'd ridden his paint horse, Dust Devil, until the loyal creature could go no further, its own life seeping into the parched earth. Now, on foot, each step was a fresh betrayal of his body's will to live. He followed a thin trickle of water, a desperate prayer on his lips, until it led him not to a spring, but to the impossible sight of a sod-roofed cabin nestled against a rock, outcropping like a frightened quail. He collapsed against the rough-hewn door, his knuckles drumming a weak final plea before darkness claimed him. When he awoke, the searing pain had been replaced by a dull, throbbing ache. He was inside, lying on a pallet of straw and coarse blankets. The air smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. A woman sat in a simple wooden chair across the small room, cleaning a rifle with methodical, unhurried movements. She wasn't young, but not old either. Her face was a map of hard living, etched by the sun, and a sorrow he recognized in the mirror some mornings. Her hair, the color of corn silk and dust, was pulled back in a severe braid. Her eyes, when they finally lifted to meet his, were a startling shade of grey, cold, and flat as a winter sky. "You're awake," she stated. It wasn't a question. Her voice was low with a rasp that suggested disuse. "Where?" Caleb's own voice was a dry crackle. "Nowhere you need to concern yourself with. Drink." She pushed a tin cup of water towards him. He struggled to sit up, hissing as the wound pulled. She watched him, making no move to help her expression unreadable. After he'd greedily gulped the water, she spoke again. The bullet went clean through. "Lucky. I packed it with yarrow and bound it. You lost a lot of blood. You should have died out there." "I'm in your debt," Caleb managed his gaze, taking in the Spartan neatness of the one-room cabin. A stone hearth, a small table, a single bed in the corner, and the chair she occupied. It was a place of solitude, not welcome. She set the rifle aside and stood walking to the hearth to stir a pot that hung over the low fire. "Don't be. I'm not looking for gratitude. Once you can walk, you're gone." "Fair enough," he conceded. "My name is Caleb Blackwood." She didn't offer her own. For 3 days, a strange, silent routine settled between them. She would tend his wound with a practiced, impersonal efficiency, provide him with broth and water, and then return to her silence, either mending clothes, cleaning her weapons, or simply staring out the cabin's single-shuttered window. Caleb, a man who had spent his life reading the subtle shifts in the wind and the tracks of animals, found her an impenetrable fortress. She moved with a purpose that hunted her eyes, constantly scanning the horizon whenever she stepped outside for a brief moment. On the 4th day, he felt strong enough to stand leaning against the cabin wall. He watched as she expertly butchered a rabbit she'd trapped her hand swift and sure. "You have a name?" he asked, the silence stretching his nerves thin. She paused, her knife stilling over the carcass. She turned her head, her grey eyes fixing on him. Rosalind. But folks who knew me called me Rosa. The past tense was deliberate and sharp. Rosa, he repeated softly. Thank you. For this. He gestured to his bandaged side, to the cabin that had saved him. She straightened up, wiping her bloody hands on a rag. She walked over to him, her proximity unsettling. She wasn't a large woman, but she carried an aura of coiled tension, like a rattlesnake, ready to strike. I'm going to tell you something. Caleb Blackwood, she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a commandment. And I want you to listen. I'm not a good person. I'm not a kind soul who helps strangers out of the goodness of her heart. There is a storm coming for me. A storm of men and guns that will tear down anything and anyone standing in my way. I patched you up because leaving a man to die on my doorstep, even a half Comanche outcast like yourself, felt like a weakness I couldn't afford. It was a mistake. Her eyes bored into his demanding comprehension. You need to leave, as soon as your legs will carry you. Forget you saw this place. Forget you saw me. Because if you are here when they find me, you'll regret saving me. She didn't say it as a threat. She said it as a prophecy, a grim and certain truth that chilled him more than the desert night. Caleb looked at her, at the deep-seated fear masquerading as hardness in her eyes. He saw the tremor in her hand that she quickly clenched into a fist. He had spent his life caught between two worlds belonging to neither. The Comanche saw him as the son of a white trader. The white men saw him as the son of a native woman. He knew what it was to be hunted, to be alone. He had an honor code, one forged in the crucible of that isolation. A debt was a debt. A man doesn't run from a debt, Rosa, he said, his voice quiet but firm. And a man doesn't leave a woman to face a storm alone. A flicker of something, frustration, despair, perhaps even a sliver of fear for him, crossed her face before the mask of cold indifference slammed back down. Fool, she spat, turning her back on him. Then you've just sealed your fate with mine. Outside, the wind began to pick up, whistling a mournful tune through the rocks. It sounded like a warning he was already too late to heed. The storm she spoke of was no longer on the horizon. He had just walked directly into its path. Another week bled into the next. A fragile, unspoken truce formed in the small cabin. Caleb, true to his word, didn't leave. He also didn't press her for details of the coming storm. Instead, he made himself useful. His strength returned with a stubborn swiftness. He began by chopping firewood, his steady axe falls a rhythm that seemed to soothe the tense silence. He repaired the loose hinge on the cabin door and reinforced a section of the small corral where Rosa kept her wiry Mustang. He was a man of quiet competence, and he sensed she respected that more than any words of comfort he could offer. He learned about her not through conversation, but observation. He saw the way she checked the horizon at dawn and dusk, the way she kept her Colt peacemaker always within reach even when kneading dough. He saw the worn, leather-bound book she read by candlelight, its pages filled with pressed flowers and what looked like poetry. It was a relic from another life, a life before she became this hard, watchful woman. One night he awoke to the sound of a muffled sob and saw her silhouette shaking by the window, her guard down for a fleeting, vulnerable moment. By morning, the walls were back up, impenetrable as ever. Their supplies began to dwindle. The salted meat was nearly gone, and the flour sack was worryingly light. I need to go to town, Caleb announced one morning, watching her measure out a meager portion of cornmeal. Redemption Gulch. It's a day's ride east. I saw the signpost before I ran into trouble. Rosa's hand stilled. No. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than starving, he countered gently. I'll be careful. No one knows me there. I'll get what we need and be back before nightfall tomorrow. You can't hide from the world forever, Rosa. Sometimes you have to walk into it to survive. She argued, her voice sharp, with an anxiety she couldn't quite conceal, but his logic was undeniable. Finally she relented, handing him a small deerskin pouch with a few coins. Don't use my name. Don't talk to anyone more than you have to. Get flour, salt, coffee, and cartridges. Nothing else. And Caleb, she added, her grey eyes locking onto his. If you see a man asking questions, a man with a silver star pinned to his waistcoat, you ride the other way, and you don't look back. Don't you dare lead him here. He nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He took her Mustang, a spirited bay that seemed to share its owner's distrustful nature, and set out at dawn. Redemption. Gulch was a sorry excuse for a town, a single dusty street, flanked by a dozen sun-bleached wooden buildings. A saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and a sheriff's office were its main attractions. It was a place where men came to lose their money, their morals, or their lives. As Caleb tied the bay to the hitching post outside Henderson's Mercantile, he felt the weight of eyes on him. His dark hair, high cheekbones, and the quiet, measured way he moved marked him as different. He ignored the stares his face, a neutral mask. Inside the store smelled of pickles, leather, and dust. He gathered the supplies on Rosa's list, keeping his head down. As the proprietor, a portly man named Henderson with a sweat-stained collar, tallied up his purchase, 2 cattle hands ambled in their spurs, jingling. Hear the news? Henderson, one of them, asked, grabbing a tin of tobacco. Bartholomew Keynes put up a fresh reward. Caleb's ears perked up, but he gave no sign of listening, pretending to inspect a display of knives. Henderson grunted. Another one. He spent a small fortune looking for that runaway ward of his. What's she done this time? Stole more of his silverware. Worse, the second man chuckled. This one's for horse thieving. A prime stallion, they say. $500. Seems she's getting bolder. 500. Henderson whistled. For that kind of money, I'd turn in my own mother. What's the girl's name again? The one with the fancy book-learning name, Rosalind Vance, the first cowboy said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice near the door. But I hear she's a real spitfire. Not one to be taken easy. Caleb's blood ran cold. Rosalind Vance. He paid for his goods, his movements calm and deliberate, his mind racing. He loaded the supplies onto the Mustang, his hands moving, with an urgency he didn't allow his face to show. Horse thieving was a hanging offense. But it didn't feel right. It felt like a pretext, a legal excuse to hunt a person with impunity. His task was done, and Rosa's warning echoed in his head. Don't talk to anyone. But a dangerous curiosity, a need to understand the shape of the beast they were hiding from, compelled him. He walked across the street, the batwing doors of the Dusty Cactus saloon, swinging open to release a wave of stale beer and cheap perfume. The saloon was dim, populated by a few grizzled prospectors, and the same cattle hands from the store. Caleb ordered a whiskey, paid for it, and stood at the end of the bar nursing the drink. He was invisible, just another drifter. On the wall behind the bar, next to faded posters for county fairs and livestock auctions, was a collection of wanted posters. And there, stark in black and white, was her face. It was a younger Rosa, her features softer, a hint of a smile playing on her lips that he had never seen. But the eyes were the same, those piercing, intelligent grey eyes. The poster was crude, the drawing a poor likeness, but it was undeniably her. Wanted $500 reward Rosalind Vance for the crime of horse theft from the K-Bar Ranch. last seen heading west of Redemption Gulch. Approach with caution. Considered desperate. Authorized by Sheriff Leland Croft by order of Bartholomew Kane. Bartholomew Kane. The name was there, again, linked directly to the law. This wasn't just a rich man's anger. It was a state-sanctioned manhunt. Caleb looked at the sheriff's name and felt a knot tighten in his gut. This was the man Rosa had warned him about, the man with the silver star, and he was in the pocket of this Kane. He finished his whiskey in one swallow, the burn grounding him. He had what they needed, but he was bringing back something more than supplies. He was bringing back the name of their enemy and the true scale of the danger they faced. Rosa wasn't just hiding from a storm. She was hiding from a hurricane, one with a name, a badge, and enough money to buy the wind itself. As he stepped back out into the harsh sunlight, Caleb knew his decision at the cabin had been cemented. He wasn't just repaying a debt anymore. He was picking a side in a war. Caleb rode hard, pushing the bay Mustang through the dusk and into the moonlit night. The information he carried felt like a physical weight in his saddlebags. When he finally saw the faint, welcoming glow of the lamp in Rosa's window, a profound sense of relief washed over him, followed immediately by a fresh wave of dread. He had to tell her what he'd learned. He found her sitting at the table the Colt peacemaker disassembled before her, each piece being meticulously cleaned and oiled. She looked up as he entered her eyes, immediately searching his for any sign of trouble. "You're late," she said, her voice flat. "I was careful," he replied, setting the sacks of flour and salt on the floor. He placed the coffee and the box of cartridges on the table beside the gun parts. She nodded a small, almost imperceptible sign of approval. "Any trouble?" Caleb pulled up the other chair, his movements weary. "No trouble for me." "But I heard things in town, Rosa. Whispers. I saw a poster." Her hands froze over a cylinder. The small cabin, which had started to feel like a sanctuary, was suddenly charged with tension. Her gaze lifted from the gun to his face, her grey eyes narrowed, demanding the truth. "They're calling you a horse thief," he said, quietly. "Rosalind Vance. There's a $500 reward on your head, put up by a man named Bartholomew Kane." The name hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. Rosa's face, already pale, lost its remaining color. She slowly, deliberately began to reassemble her pistol, her fingers moving with a practiced sureness that belied the turmoil in her eyes. "So you know," she whispered, her voice a brittle thing. She clicked the cylinder back into place, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "I know a name," Caleb corrected her. "I know the lie they're telling. I don't know the truth." She gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "The truth. The truth is a luxury, Caleb. It's heavy. It gets you killed." She stood up and began to pace the short length of the cabin, her movements agitated like a caged animal. "Bartholomew Kane is not a man, he's an emperor. He owns the K-Bar Ranch, which is bigger than some states. He owns the cattle, the mines, the water rights. He owns the town of Redemption Gulch, from the saloon keeper right up to Sheriff Leland Croft." She stopped and turned to face him, her arms wrapped around herself, as if holding her own body together. "My parents died of fever when I was 16. They worked for him. Kane, in a grand gesture of charity, took me in as his ward. He had me educated, taught me letters and numbers. He paraded me at social gatherings like one of his prize-winning fillies. He wanted me to be refined. He wanted me to be his." Her voice dropped thick with a disgust that was almost tangible. As I got older, his attention changed. It wasn't fatherly. It was possessive. He saw me as another one of his properties. He controlled who I spoke to, what I read, where I went. The grand house became a gilded cage. I tried to leave once politely. He broke my wrist and told me the only way I would ever leave the K-Bar Ranch was in a pine box. Caleb listened, his fists clenching at his sides. He had seen that kind of evil before, the kind that cloaked itself in wealth and respectability. 2 months ago, Rosa continued, her eyes fixed on a point in the dark, past a man came to the ranch. A federal surveyor named Peterson. He was there to officially map the northern boundary of Kane's property, a section that bordered Apache land. Kane was trying to claim the Redwater Creek, which rightfully belonged to them. Peterson was an honest man. He refused to be bribed. He told Kane he would file his report accurately. She took a shaky breath. That night, I overheard them arguing in Kane's study. It was loud, violent. I crept to the door. I saw Kane. I saw him strike Peterson with a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. Again and again. There was so much blood. The memory stole her voice for a moment. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. Kane and his foreman, a brute named Hector, dragged the body out. They buried him somewhere on the ranch. The next day, Kane told everyone that Peterson had taken his payment and left for Prescott in the night. No one questioned him. He knew I'd heard, she said, her voice barely audible. He didn't know I saw it, but he knew I was there. The way he looked at me the next morning, it was the look of a wolf who had cornered its prey. He wasn't just my captor anymore. He was my executioner. I knew he would kill me to ensure my silence. So I ran. I took one of his horses a bag of food and rode until the horse gave out. The horse thieving charge. It's just an excuse, a legal way to hunt me down and silence me for good. The whole story tumbled out, a torrent of fear and pain held back for too long. The cabin felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Caleb finally understood. She wasn't a criminal. She was a witness to a murder committed by the most powerful man in the territory. His thoughts were interrupted by a sound from outside, the faint but distinct crunch of a horseshoe on gravel. Instantly, Rosa's demeanor shifted. The terrified woman vanished, replaced by the hardened survivor. She blew out the lamp, plunging the cabin into near total darkness, and grabbed her rifle from the wall. "Get down," she hissed, moving silently to the window, peering through a tiny crack in the shutter. Caleb drew his own revolver, his heart pounding. The storm she had prophesied was no longer coming. It had arrived. Through the shutter, Caleb could see a lone rider in the moonlight, sitting atop his horse, just beyond the faint circle of light from the dying campfire. The man was a silhouette, but he sat with an unnerving stillness, a predator who knew his prey was cornered. On his waistcoat, a glint of silver caught the moonlight, a star-shaped badge. No, not a sheriff's badge. It was smaller, more ornate, the kind worn by a private agent, a bounty hunter. "He found us," Rosa breathed, her voice tight with disbelief and terror. The shadow of Bartholomew Kane had finally fallen over their small sanctuary. The man outside didn't move. He just sat there, a patient statue in the pale moonlight, letting the silence and the knowledge of his presence do the work for him. It was a hunter's tactic, designed to fray nerves and force a mistake. "Who is he?" Caleb whispered, his eyes straining to see through the darkness. "I don't know him by face," Rosa breathed back, her rifle stock pressed tight against her shoulder. "But Kane has men on his payroll. Trackers. Men who can follow a ghost through a sandstorm. He must be one of them." Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were the thumping of their own hearts and the chirping of crickets, blissfully unaware of the human drama unfolding. Finally, the man spoke, his voice carrying effortlessly on the still night air. It was calm, with a slight Irish lilt, utterly devoid of menace, which somehow made it more threatening. Rosalind Vance. My name is Finn O'Malley. Mr. Kane is terribly worried about you. He sent me to escort you home. Make this easy on yourself, girl. There's nowhere left to run. Rosa's knuckles were white on her rifle. He's lying, she hissed to Caleb. He's here to put a bullet in me and collect his pay. Caleb's mind raced. The cabin was a death trap. One room, one door, one window. O'Malley could wait them out, or simply set the roof ablaze. Their only advantage was that he was alone for now. He doesn't know I'm here, Caleb whispered urgently. He thinks you're a lone woman. We can use that. He outlined a quick, desperate plan. Rosa listened, her eyes wide in the gloom, and after a moment's hesitation, she gave a single, sharp nod. She moved to the door, took a deep breath, and called out, her voice trembling, a masterful performance of a terrified woman. Leave me be. I'm not going back now. Now, Miss Vance, O'Malley's voice crooned. Don't be difficult. I have a $500 piece of paper that says you are. I'd much rather bring you back, sitting upright in the saddle. This was the opening. While Rosa kept him talking, Caleb slipped out the back window, a space barely wide enough for his shoulders. He landed silently on the soft earth, his moccasined feet making no sound. The cabin was built against a rock face, providing cover. He pressed himself into the shadows, his revolver clutched in his hand, and began to circle around the rock outcropping. He moved with the patient stealth his Comanche grandfather had taught him a ghost in the night. He could see O'Malley more clearly now, a lean man with a long duster and a hawkish nose, hence his moniker, Hawkeye. His horse shifted nervously, sensing something amiss. O'Malley, however, remained focused on the front of the cabin, a smirk playing on his lips, confident he had his quarry trapped. Last chance, Rosalind, he called. Come out or I start taking this place apart, board by board. Stay back, Rosa shouted, firing her rifle into the air. The blast echoed through the canyons, a sharp crack of defiance. It was the signal. As O'Malley's horse shied at the gunshot, Caleb burst from the shadows behind him. Drop it! He yelled, his voice a low growl of command. O'Malley reacted with startling speed. He wasn't a common thug. He was a professional. Instead of reaching for the sky, he spun in his saddle, his own pistol appearing in his hand as if by magic. A shot rang out, and Caleb felt a searing heat pass by his ear as he threw himself to the ground. He rolled and came up firing. His bullet wasn't aimed to kill but to disable. It struck O'Malley's shoulder, the impact spinning the smaller man out of his saddle. O'Malley hit the ground with a grunt of pain, his pistol flying from his grasp. Before he could recover, Caleb was on him, the barrel of his revolver pressed against the bounty hunter's temple. Just then, the cabin door flew open, and Rosa rushed out, her rifle leveled. She saw the scene, O'Malley on the ground wounded, and Caleb standing over him in control. Her face was a mask of shock adrenaline and a dawning, grudging respect. Check him for other weapons, Caleb ordered, never taking his eyes or his gun off O'Malley. Rosa quickly and expertly frisked the man, removing a hideout pistol from his boot and a long knife from his belt. O'Malley grimaced in pain, blood seeping through his duster. Who the hell are you? He spat at Caleb, his eyes narrowed in fury. The poster said she was alone. The poster lied, Caleb said simply. Get on your feet. They marched him into the cabin. Caleb tore a strip from a blanket and had Rosa bind O'Malley's hands tightly while he kept him covered. You've made a powerful enemy, friend, O'Malley sneered, slumping into the chair. Bartholomew Kane does not forget. He'll send 10 more men after me. 100. Let him. Rosa said, her voice hard, her fear replaced by a cold fire. Confronting the first wave of the storm and surviving had changed something in her. They knew they couldn't stay. O'Malley's riderless horse would eventually find its way back to town, or his absence would be noted. They had to run, and they had to run now. They worked quickly, packing what little they had, the remaining food ammunition, a water skin, and the worn book of poetry that Rosa slipped into her saddlebag. "What about him?" Rosa asked, nodding towards their prisoner. Caleb looked at O'Malley, whose hateful gaze promised retribution. Killing him was the simplest, safest option. It was what the wilderness and men like Cain demanded. But Caleb looked at Rosa, at the woman who had saved his life, despite her fear, and he knew he couldn't do it. Not in front of her. Not after they'd just fought, to preserve life, not end it. "We'll tie him up," Caleb decided. "Leave him enough water to last a day. By the time he gets loose or someone finds him, we'll have a good head start." They bound O'Malley securely to the chair, gagged him, and left the water-filled cup on the table, just within reach, if he managed to tip the chair over. As they prepared to leave, O'Malley's eyes full of venom followed them. They stepped out into the pre-dawn chill. The landscape, once a refuge, now felt hostile, full of watching eyes. Caleb saddled O'Malley's healthier horse for Rosa, and took her tired Mustang for himself. As they rode away from the small cabin, neither of them looked back. It was no longer a home. It was a tombstone for a life of hiding. They were now fugitives together, bound by a shared secret and a common enemy. The tense silence between them had been broken by the crucible of combat, replaced by a new unspoken understanding. It was no longer her fight or his debt. It was their survival. The fragile truce, forged in silence, had been reforged in gunfire into a fragile alliance. They were two lone figures against a vast, unforgiving territory, controlled by a man who would stop at nothing to see them dead. The odds were impossible, but for the first time in a long time, neither of them was completely alone. The first few days on the run were a blur of dust, fear, and exhaustion. They rode hard, pushing west into the jagged, sun-scorched mountains of the Tonto Basin. Caleb, relying on the tracking and survival skills that were his birthright, led them through hidden canyons and game trails, avoiding the main roads where they would be most vulnerable. He taught Rosa how to read the land, how to find water, where none seemed to exist, and how to move without leaving a trace. In turn, she tended to the festering scrape on his ear from O'Malley's bullet, and shared her meager rations, without complaint, her resilience a constant surprise. The roles between them had shifted. In the cabin, she had been the protector, the reluctant savior. Out here in the vast wilderness, he was the guide, the guardian. The power dynamic had balanced, and with it, a new level of trust began to grow. They spoke more freely around the small, smokeless campfires he built each night. He told her of his childhood, caught between the lodge of his mother's people and the trading post of his father, a man of two bloods, belonging to neither. She, in turn, shared stories of the life Cain had stolen from her, of her love for books, and botany, her dreams of one day seeing the ocean. These shared vulnerabilities were bricks in the foundation of their bond. One evening, as they watched the sun set, painting the canyon walls in fiery hues of orange and purple, the stark reality of their situation settled upon them. "We can't run forever," Caleb Rosa said, her voice quiet. "Cain's reach is long. His money is longer. Every town, every settlement will be looking over our shoulder. This isn't a life." I know he agreed, staring into the dying embers of the fire. Running is what he expects. O'Malley was just the first. The next ones will be better, more ruthless. We're just delaying the inevitable. A desperate, audacious idea began to form in his mind. An idea born from the Comanche principle, that sometimes the most unexpected attack is the most effective. "We've been running west," he said, thinking aloud. "Away from him, Away from Redemption Gulch. Of course, she replied, confused. Where else would we go? Back, he said, turning to look at her. The firelight flickered in his dark eyes, making them gleam with intensity. We go back. Rosa stared at him, as if he'd lost his mind. Back to Redemption, Gulch to Cain. That's suicide. It's the last thing they'll expect. He argued, his voice gaining conviction. They'll be searching the Western Territories, sending riders towards California, combing every town between here and the Colorado River. But their backs will be turned. Their own territory will be the one place they feel safe, the one place they aren't looking. Even if we get there. What then? She demanded, her voice rising with a mix of fear and frustration. Walk up to the K-Bar Ranch and hope they don't shoot us on sight. No, Caleb said, leaning forward. We stop running and we start fighting. You're the only person alive who knows Cain is a murderer. But your word against his is nothing. We need proof. Something undeniable. Proof of what he was careful. There was no one else there. Caleb's mind went back to her story. The surveyor. Peterson, you said Cain was trying to steal land from the Apache, the land around Redwater Creek. A federal surveyor wouldn't just show up. There would be paperwork, maps, official documents, letters of transit. Cain wouldn't risk destroying federal papers. He's arrogant, but not stupid. He would have hidden them. And Peterson would have had personal effects, a journal, a watch, something Cain might have kept as a trophy. If we could find those things in Cain's own house, we'd have our proof. Proof that Peterson was there and never left. The sheer insanity of the plan was matched only by its brilliance. It was a long shot, a gamble against impossible odds, but it offered something that endless running did not a glimmer of hope. A chance to end the nightmare, not just escape it. His study, Rosa whispered, her mind catching up to his. He has a large mahogany desk with a false bottom in one of the drawers, and a safe behind a painting of his father. That's where he'd keep it. She looked at Caleb, a new light in her eyes. The hunted look was still there, but it was now overlaid with something else resolve. For weeks she had been the prey. He was offering her a chance to become the hunter. It's a fool's errand, she said, but the protest was weak, a final flicker of her old fear. We are fools, then, Caleb said with a slight smile. But we'll be fools with a purpose. The decision was made. Their destination was no longer some far-off, unknown sanctuary. It was the heart of their enemy's empire, the K-Bar Ranch. They would need to get past Cain's legion of ranch hands, infiltrate a house she knew like a prison, and find the evidence that could either set them free or get them buried in an unmarked grave right next to the poor surveyor. They were at a crossroads. One path led to a life of perpetual fear and flight. The other led back into the devil's jaws with only the slimmest chance of victory. They chose the devil's path. The next morning, under the pale light of dawn, they turned their horses around and began the long, dangerous ride east. The journey back was fraught with a different kind of tension. Before they were running from a known threat. Now they were willfully walking toward it. Every rider they saw in the distance, every plume of dust on the horizon, sent a jolt of adrenaline through them. They traveled mostly by night, hiding in draws and arroyos during the day, their senses honed to a razor's edge. Caleb's plan was to approach the K-Bar Ranch from the north through the rugged badlands that bordered the Apache territory. It was harsh, difficult terrain that even Cain's experienced outriders would avoid. As they drew closer to Redemption Gulch, the landscape became hauntingly familiar to Rosa. She would point out a distant butte or a twisted juniper tree, her voice low and tight with memories. They made their final camp 2 miles from the ranch, concealed in a cluster of rocks overlooking the sprawling property. The K-Bar was more than a ranch. It was a fortress. A large two-story main house stood at its center, surrounded by bunkhouses, barns, and corrals, all teeming with the life of Kane's private army of cowboys and gunmen. The study is on the ground floor back corner. Rosa whispered, her eyes scanning the familiar layout. The window looks out over my mother's old rose garden. Kane keeps it tended a sick sort of tribute. She shivered. There are always 2 guards at the front gate, and at least one who patrols the grounds all night. They watched for a full day, studying the patterns of the ranch. They noted the changing of the guards, the timing of the patrols, the moment when the generator that powered the lights in the main house was shut down for the night, plunging all but the bunkhouse into darkness. The plan was for that night. The moon was a sliver offering minimal light. Caleb blackened their faces with a mixture of charcoal and grease. "You're sure about this?" he asked one last time, his hand resting on her arm. Her skin was cold. She met his gaze, her own determination, a reflection of his. "I've never been more certain of anything." "He took my life from me, Caleb. It's time I took something back." They left the horses and moved on foot, silent wraiths in the darkness. They slipped past the main gate by crawling through a shallow irrigation ditch, the cold water soaking them to the bone. They reached the side of the main house, pressing themselves into the shadows of the porch. The rose garden was just as Rosa described its fragrant scent, a strange, sweet perfume in the tense air. The patrolman, a large silhouette with a rifle slung over his shoulder, made his rounds. They held their breath as he passed their hiding spot, his boots crunching on the gravel path just feet away. When he was gone, Caleb went to work on the study window. Using the tip of his knife, he painstakingly worked at the latch, a process that took an agonizingly long 10 minutes before it finally gave way with a soft click. He slid the window open and slipped inside, followed by Rosa. The study was just as she remembered it, dark, opulent, and smelling of leather and cigar smoke. It felt like trespassing in a mausoleum. Moonlight filtering through the window illuminated the massive mahogany desk and the stern portrait of Kane's father on the wall. The desk first, Rosa whispered, her voice barely a tremor. She went to it with a familiarity that made Caleb's heart ache her hands, finding the hidden spring on the underside of the top right drawer. A faint click and a thin panel at the bottom of the drawer popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a leather-bound ledger and a roll of official-looking documents tied with a ribbon. Caleb unrolled them. They were Peterson's surveying maps, clearly showing the Redwater Creek outside of Kane's legal claim. The ledger contained meticulous entries of payments, bribes to officials, exorbitant fees for trackers, and a large recent payment to one Finn O'Malley. It was a roadmap of Kane's corruption. Now the safe Rosa breathed, moving towards the painting. She lifted the heavy frame aside to reveal the black iron door of the safe. She knelt, her ear pressed to the cold metal as she began to turn the dial, her memory straining to recall the combination she had seen Kane use countless times. Left to 27. Right to 54. Suddenly a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside the study. They both froze. Heavy footsteps approached the door. There was no time to hide, no time to escape. The doorknob began to turn. Caleb reacted on pure instinct. He shoved the ledger and maps into his shirt and pushed Rosa behind the heavy velvet curtains that flanked the window, drawing his revolver. The door swung open. Standing there, silhouetted by the hall lamp, was not a guard, but Bartholomew Kane himself. He was a large, imposing man with silver hair and a face that was handsome in a cruel, predatory way. He held a glass of brandy in one hand. He hadn't seen them yet. He walked towards his desk, a frown on his face, as if sensing something was amiss. His eyes fell upon the slightly ajar window. Then behind Kane, Another figure appeared in the doorway, Sheriff Leland Croft. He looked tired. His face deeply lined his badge, looking tarnished in the dim light. "You said it was urgent." Bartholomew Croft said, his voice weary. Kane didn't turn. His eyes were scanning the room, his sixth sense for trouble screaming at him. He saw the disturbed dust near the safe, the lifted painting hanging askew. "We have intruders," Kane said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He set his brandy down and reached for the pistol tucked in his waistband. From behind the curtain, Rosa knew their chance was gone. The element of surprise was lost, but she had one card left to play. She stepped out from behind the curtain, her face pale but resolute. "Hello, Bartholomew," she said, her voice shaking but clear. Kane spun around his face, a mask of shock which quickly twisted into rage. You dare to come back to my house?" Sheriff Croft's jaw dropped. "Miss Vance." "She's not alone," Caleb said, stepping out from the other side of the window, his own gun leveled at Kane. Kane's eyes darted between them, then to the sheriff. "Croft, arrest them." "They're thieves! Trespassers! He's a murderer!" Sheriff Rosa's voice rang out, filled with conviction. "He killed Federal Surveyor Peterson, right here in this room. We have the proof." Caleb pulled the ledger from his shirt. "It's all in here, Sheriff. Your name, too. All the money Kane paid you to look the other way." Croft's face went white. He looked from the ledger in Caleb's hand to the furious face of his patron, and then to the cold, determined eyes of Rosalind Vance. He was caught. His years of complicity had finally cornered him. His hand drifted down, hovering over the butt of his own pistol. The study had become a powder keg. 4 people, 3 guns, and a dozen fatal choices hanging in the balance. The reckoning Rosa had fled from had finally arrived, not in the empty wilderness, but in the very heart of her gilded cage. The silence in the study was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Sheriff Croft's hand trembled over his gun, his face a canvas of indecision. He was a man trapped between the monster who owned him and the damning truth that could hang him. "Don't be a fool, Leland Kane," snarled, his eyes never leaving Caleb. "Their word against mine, shoot them. We'll say they broke in, that you caught them in the act. It's clean." "Is it Bartholomew Rosa?" challenged her voice, ringing with a newfound strength. "Will shooting us bring Peterson back? Will it make the entries in that ledger disappear? All it will do is add our blood to the stains on your carpet." Caleb kept his revolver steady on Kane, but his attention was on the sheriff. He saw the flicker of desperation in the lawman's eyes, the shame of a man who had sold his soul, piece by piece, and was only now realizing the cost. "The ledger mentions payments for a U.S. Marshal," Caleb said, his voice low and steady, a calculated bluff. Seems Kane was worried about more than just a local sheriff. "Once we're dead, who's to say he won't clean up all his loose ends, including you?" That was the spark. The idea that he was as disposable as the rest of Kane's victims ignited a survival instinct in Croft that years of bribery had dulled. With a strangled cry of desperation, he drew his pistol. But he didn't point it at Caleb or Rosa. He pointed it at Bartholomew Kane. "No more, Bartholomew," Croft choked out. "I won't. Not this." Kane's face contorted in disbelief and fury. "You worthless, spineless coward," he roared, and in that split second of distraction, he moved. He wasn't a politician. At his core, he was a predator. He lunged not at Croft, but at the heavy mahogany desk, sweeping a lamp off it and shoving the massive piece of furniture towards Caleb. The desk crashed into Caleb, sending him stumbling backward. Kane used the moment to draw his own pistol. The room erupted in a cacophony of gunfire. Croft, panicking, fired wildly. One of his shots shattered the window. Kane fired at Caleb, the bullet splintering the doorframe next to his head. Caleb, recovering his balance, returned fire. He didn't aim for Kane's chest, but for the gun hand. His shot was true. The bullet tore through Kane's wrist, sending the man's pistol clattering to the floor. Kane howled in pain and rage, clutching his mangled hand. The shots had woken the ranch. Shouts echoed from the bunkhouse. Boots were pounding on the porch. "We have to go now," Caleb yelled, grabbing Rosa's arm. They scrambled out through the shattered window, leaving Kane writhing on the floor and a stunned Sheriff Croft standing amidst the chaos he had helped create. They sprinted across the lawn as ranch hands began spilling out of the bunkhouse, firing blindly into the darkness. Bullets whizzed past them, thudding into the earth and trees. They dove into the irrigation ditch, the muddy water providing meager cover as they scrambled back towards the Badlands, where they'd left the horses. They were exposed, exhausted, and running on pure adrenaline. Suddenly, a figure rose up from behind a rock ahead of them. It was Hector Kane's brutish foreman, who had circled around to cut them off. He raised his rifle, the muzzle, a dark, cavernous eye in the gloom. Before he could fire, a shot rang out from behind them, back at the house. Hector grunted and staggered, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. He collapsed to the ground. Caleb and Rosa looked back in astonishment. Standing on the porch of the main house, his pistol smoking in the pale pre-dawn light, was Sheriff Leland Croft. He had made his choice. He met Caleb's gaze across the distance, gave a short, sharp nod, and then turned to face the ranch hands, his voice booming with newfound authority. "Hold your fire. By order of the law, this ranch is now a crime scene. The owner, Bartholomew Kane, is under arrest for murder." Using the precious seconds Croft had bought them, Caleb and Rosa reached the horses. They mounted up and rode like the wind not stopping until the sun was high in the sky and the K-Bar Ranch was miles behind them. They had the ledger, the maps, and their lives. They finally stopped by a small hidden spring. For a long moment, they just sat on their horses, breathing in the clean, free air. The exhaustion hit them. Then a profound, bone-deep weariness, followed by an exhilarating wave of relief. "It's over," Rosa whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. She slid off her horse, her legs unsteady. "It's a beginning," Caleb corrected, dismounting beside her. He looked at her not as a fugitive or a victim, but as the strong, resilient woman who had faced down her monster and won. The warning she had given him in the cabin a lifetime ago echoed in his mind. "You'll regret saving me." He had risked his life, been shot at, and hunted across the territory. By any measure, he should have regretted it. But as he looked at her, at the first genuine, unguarded smile he had ever seen grace her lips, he knew. He didn't regret a single moment. He had found something out here, in the dust and blood, that he'd never had before. A purpose, a partner, an alliance forged not of convenience but of shared spirit. "Caleb," she said softly, stepping closer. "The debt is paid." "It was never about the debt, Rosa," he answered, his voice equally quiet. "Not really." The sun warmed their faces. They had Kane's ledger, which they would deliver to the U.S. Marshals in Prescott. They had a future uncertain and unwritten, stretching out before them like the vast open territory. They were scarred, they were fugitives, but they were free. And together they would face whatever came next, not as two lonely outcasts, but as survivors who had found their own brand of redemption in the heart of the storm. And so the warning became a promise. Caleb Blackwood didn't regret saving Rosalind Vance, for in doing so, he saved himself. Their story isn't just one of bullets and frantic chases across the Old West. It's a story about how sometimes the most dangerous path is the only one that leads to freedom. It's about two people from different worlds, both hunted and alone, who found in each other the courage to stop running and fight back against the darkness. They faced down a tyrant, exposed a murderer, and gave a corrupt lawman a chance to reclaim his soul. Their future remains unwritten, a dusty trail leading into the sunset, but for the first time they walk it together. What did you think of Caleb's and Rosa's journey? Would you have heeded her warning, or would you have stayed? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by this tale of grit survival and unexpected alliances, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with a fellow history and drama lover, and most importantly, subscribing to our channel for more stories that bring the raw, untamed spirit of the West to life. Thank you for listening.